There is a book that should be on the first page of the Bible, a text so ancient, so profound, that many believe it to be the true beginning of Revelation. It doesn't begin with, "in the beginning." It begins before that, much earlier. It was given by God, kept secret, and later banned, silenced, suppressed by the men who decided what the world could and could not read. What you are about to discover is not a theory, it is the remains of a real book, spoken of by ancient sources and feared for centuries. If at any point in this video something touches your heart, stop and comment. I want to know what was erased. This shows that you are awake and helps this message reach more people. Take this opportunity to like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell. And if you want to go further, click on Become a Member. By doing so, you become part of something bigger, a generation that seeks the truth that was hidden. Why does Genesis begin without any explanation of who wrote it? Why is there no introduction, no preface, no single line explaining what came before the beginning? The silence before the first verse has always bothered the most attentive scholars, and some of them have found evidence that something was removed, a text that prepared the reader to understand not only creation, but the Creator himself. And that text was erased. There are records in the writings of ancient Jewish authors such as Philo of Alexandria and in Second Temple texts that mention the former revelation, a heavenly manuscript that angels delivered before the foundation of the world. It has been known by various names: the Scroll of Creation, the Book of the Pure Word, the Beginning of Wisdom. Some claim that Adam had access to it. Others claim that Enoch was the last to see it before it disappeared. But all agree on one thing: it is not in the modern Genesis. And it should be. This book was not rejected by chance. It spoke of realities that contradicted the structure of the religious system of the time. It revealed the role of celestial beings before the creation of the earth, described orders that God gave before time, and contained a name that, according to ancient manuscripts, could never be pronounced by men. When the elders of Israel compiled the sacred texts, this book was the first to be excluded, because it gave away too much. Some scholars believe that this book was among the oldest scrolls of the Essenes, hidden in caves long before the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. Others claim that it was removed during the final canonization of the Torah, when scribes decided which texts were safe enough to be read by future generations. But what was so dangerous about this book? The answer may lie in passages from Enoch, Jubilees, and even indirect references in the Zohar. It contained the spiritual structure of creation, the names of the first voices that responded to God, and an account of what existed before time was numbered. If this is true, then Genesis was not the beginning, it was a continuation, like a second chapter that begins without a prologue, a narrative that omits the previous context by strategic decision. The earliest rabbis, according to hidden records in the Talmud, called this text Sefer Reshit HaEmet, the book of the true beginning. It dealt not only with the formation of the physical world, but with the spiritual order that preceded matter. A kingdom of light, heavenly decisions, and a war that preceded human existence. This content would have been removed out of fear of revealing too much, fear of breaking the authority of controlled revelation. There is also evidence in the biblical text itself that something is missing. Genesis begins with an unusual narrative tone, as if the reader should already know what it is about. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But what beginning? Why? Verse 2 already speaks of an earth without form and void, as if something had happened before. Where is the thing that preceded this? Where is the reason for creation? And even more, where is the account of the first divine decree, the thing that gave rise to the very idea of creation? A fragment cited by Clement of Alexandria, still in the first centuries of Christianity, speaks of the ancient book that narrated the thoughts of God before any creature existed. And in Gnostic texts found in Nag Hammadi, there is a description of a hidden logos, a sacred word written before the worlds, which was given to men and then taken away so that they would not become like the celestials. All of this converges on the same suspicion. There was a previous book, a book that revealed the purest origin, a book that was removed and replaced. This substitution was not just an omission, it was an intentional reconstruction of the narrative. Genesis has become the official version, but there are signs that it was written on top of layers of earlier texts. An older oral tradition that spoke of cosmic events, celestial decisions, and revelations that would never have been understood by a newly created humanity. This is why some scholars argue that the Genesis we know is like a closed door. It shows us what is on the inside, but completely hides what was on the outside. The removed book was the key to that door, a key that was buried forever. Or so they tried. Moses, according to some mystical rabbinical theories, would have had access to this book. But when he came down with the tablets, he did not bring the parchment. Some say he hid it. Others say he was forbidden to bring it. There are reports that suggest that this text was kept inside the Ark of the Covenant, not with the tablets, but under them, rolled up, sealed, and never touched again. A scroll that contained words that could not be read aloud. A text written in letters of fire, as the mystics say, and that could only be revealed at the end of time, when humanity's understanding was complete. But why hide something so important? Why not allow the first men, the patriarchs, the prophets, or even the apostles to speak about it openly? Because according to the ancients, this book revealed not only the beginning, but the reason. Not just the how of things, but the why. It spoke of the original rebellion, the separation from the Almighty, and the plan that God already had before he even said, "Let there be light." It showed that the creation of the earth was only part of a greater plan, a movement within an invisible war that had already begun. Revelations like that could not be given to a people still bound to the earth and the flesh. What we have today, then, is a story with Volume 1 ripped out, an introduction suppressed. The true prologue of the Bible was hidden, perhaps to protect men, perhaps to keep power in the hands of a few, or perhaps because the world was not yet ready for it. But the signs remain. Fragments in rocks, records in forgotten languages, passages preserved by small, persecuted communities throughout history. This book is not completely lost. It survives in whispers, in echoes, and perhaps between the lines of Genesis itself. Some early Jewish schools, especially among the scribes at Qumran, believed that this sealed book contained the true name of creation, a name that was not Genesis, but a combination of words that described the divine movement before time. They taught that this name was mentioned only once in history, at the very moment when God conceived creation, and that the record of this conception was confined to the heavens, transmitted by a being of light who was neither angel nor man. He carried the sacred manuscript like a seal, and when men tried to translate it, the earth shook. Enoch, in his book considered apocryphal, even described the heavenly tablets where everything was written before the world was formed. And there is a passage in which he mentions a living writing, the words that burned without being consumed, and that were supposedly given to the first righteous man, but collected after the fall. This living word is, according to some scholars, the core of this lost book. A revelation in its purest form, incomprehensible to natural minds, but perfect for souls connected to the Creator before corruption. Over the centuries, attempts to reconstruct this book have emerged in various traditions. Some are mystical, some are Gnostic, and even early Christian, but all failed to capture its essence. For this book was not just words, it was an experience, a manifestation of God's own thought before time began, and when man tried to reduce it to paper and ink, something essential was lost. The book ceased to be transmitted and was hidden away among the mysteries, but even in silence, it never completely disappeared. There are mentions of it in the Psalms, in the prophets, in symbols hidden in the genealogies, and even in the expressions of Jesus when he spoke in parables about the kingdom prepared before the foundation of the world. All of this points to a previous knowledge, a content that, if revealed, would change not only how we see the beginning, but how we understand the whole purpose of existence. And that is why this book was the first to be removed. Among the scholars who have dared to investigate this mystery, there is a pattern. They all report finding too many gaps in the canonical texts, not just in Genesis, but throughout the Pentateuch. Gaps that only make sense if something earlier has been deliberately excluded. It is not just a missing chapter, but a foundation, the foundation on which the rest of the Bible was built, a foundation removed, altered, camouflaged by a new beginning that begins already in the middle of the story, as if the true foundations of Revelation were hidden under layers of sacred silence. And there is another point that few people mention: the total absence of authorship in the book of Genesis. Unlike other books, it does not present a direct writer, nor even a mention of how it was received. This is rare and suspicious, as if it were a rewrite, a summary, an adaptation. Several rabbinical lines suggest that Genesis was not the first book written, but the first approved, the first authorized to be read. Which raises the question, where is what was rejected? Where is the version that the scribes considered too dangerous? The answer may lie with the scribes themselves. According to ancient records from the school of Ezra, some texts were copied with visible ink, and others with a special ink, invisible to the naked eye. They said that certain revelations could only be read under sacred light at specific times. The book that was removed from the Bible would have been one of these, a text that could not be delivered in an ordinary way, and when the people turned away from God, the priests decided to seal it, not destroy it, just hide it, protect it, like someone who keeps a sword in the temple waiting for the right time to take it out of its sheath. That's why the book was hidden, not forgotten, and that's why it keeps reappearing in fragments, in visions, in apocryphal texts, and in the coded words of the prophets. It's everywhere, except where it belongs, at the beginning, the book that was supposed to begin the Bible, the book that would make sense of Genesis, explain the void before creation, and show the eternal plan before time. But that book has been removed, and now the only question left is, why? The most widely accepted answer among ancient scholars is simple and disturbing. This book revealed that the creation of man was not the starting point of divine history. It showed that human beings were inserted into a scenario that was already underway, a spiritual battlefield, a sequence of events that had begun long before the earth, and this contradicted the religious power structure of the time. To say that there was something before man was to say that there was a purpose greater than humanity itself, and this idea, for some, was unacceptable. The book's content also exposed the existence of celestial beings with authority before physical creation, not just angels, but leaders of spiritual orders who actively participated in the construction of reality. Some obeyed, others rebelled. And the fall of these beings, mentioned briefly in other texts, was described in detail in this lost book. It spoke of the first division in the heavens, the K, first judgment, the first sentence, content that, if released to the public, would call into question all theology constructed later. Furthermore, there was a section of the book that reportedly described the exact moment in time when the plan of salvation was conceived, before the fall, before sin, before creation. This plan was not a response to man's error, it was already there. This means that God did not react to sin. He had already foreseen and provided the way. But to reveal this would have destroyed centuries of religious interpretation centered on human guilt. That is why the book was suppressed, because it shifted the center of man's story to God's eternal purpose. Moses may have read this book. Perhaps it was the only one. But by divine command, or by the decision of the elders, he was unable to transmit it, and so Genesis was written as a bridge, an adapted version, authoritative, true, but incomplete. And the original book, the one that was supposed to open the scriptures, was sealed. But now, amid the traces, references, and fragments scattered over the centuries, its presence is beginning to emerge again, because the world is once again beginning to ask the right question: what came before in the beginning? The Jewish esoteric tradition has always held that God writes on three levels: the revealed, the hidden, and the sealed. Genesis belongs to the first, but the lost book, the one that was supposed to start everything, was part of the sealed level. It was the kind of revelation that could not be given in ordinary words. That is why it did not disappear. It was spiritually hidden. Only those who study between the lines, who connect the silences of the Bible, who hear the echoes between the verses, can perceive its shadow. It is no coincidence that the apostles themselves alluded to this mystery. John begins his gospel with, "In the beginning was the Word," a phrase that seems to compete with Genesis. He does not say, "In the beginning, God created." He goes further. He speaks of a previous word, living, conscious, eternal. This was no accident. John was echoing something older, a knowledge that predated physical creation, a revelation that was already circulating among those who knew what had been removed. He did not write this to be poetic. He was pointing to the book that was supposed to have started it all. Some desert sects preserved fragments of this book in chants, prayers, and symbols. A circle of 7 points, representing the 7 voices of God before creation. A hidden name pronounced only once in a lifetime by a priest in absolute fasting. These details are not found in the canonical texts, but survive in forgotten oral and ritual fragments. They indicate that the contents of this book were active, they were alive. They were more than a text. They were a presence that shaped reality, and that is precisely why it was hidden. Because its full revelation would change the way we understand the Bible itself. It would show that the creation of the earth was just one chapter in a much larger plan, a plan that began in another reality, in another time, in a dimension where God's thoughts are matter and His decrees are eternity. The book was silenced to protect what we could not yet bear, but now its echoes are returning, because the time has come to look back at the beginning, that which has never been told. Today, theologians, archaeologists, and Bible scholars continue to stumble upon evidence of this missing book. It's as if the Bible begins in Act 2, omitting the setting and background of the greatest story in the universe. There are Sumerian, Egyptian, and even ancient Ethiopian accounts that describe a divine message from before time, given to the first spiritual beings before the existence of man. These accounts have never fit into Scripture, until now. They speak the same language as that forgotten book. They reinforce the idea that there was something greater, older and more decisive, and that it was wrested from humanity's hands. The first translations of the Bible were already incomplete. The Hebrew canon itself rejected dozens of texts that circulated among the ancients. But a pattern repeats itself. All the removed texts pointed to something earlier, something that challenged the authority of the scribes, the religious leaders, the holders of the official revelation. The book that was supposed to begin the Bible was not excluded because it contained lies, but because it contained too many truths. Truths that changed the focus of religion, truths that reconnected man directly to a God who thought and decreed before time even existed. The absence of this book is also evident in the way many doctrines have been built on gaps: the origin of evil, the fall of the first beings, the reason for the creation of the earth. All of these are treated superficially or symbolically. But the forgotten book went straight to the point. It explained the original conflict, the rebellion that divided heaven, and the reason God created a physical world out of chaos. Such revelations would require new understanding, and for many, it would represent the end of centuries of spiritual control. But despite all the efforts to erase it, this book lives on, not in libraries, not in translations, but in the spiritual memory of humanity. It pulsates in the questions that Genesis does not answer. It appears in the details that escape Scripture. It screams in the silences between verses, and now it is beginning to reappear, not through scribes, but through those who awaken, those who sense that the beginning has not yet been told in its entirety. This awakening has disturbed institutions. Many of those who research this book in depth have disappeared from academia or have been discredited, not for lack of evidence, but for too many questions. Because the more one studies what came before Genesis, the more one realizes that the current Bible is a true revelation, but conditioned by time, by culture, by what men were prepared to receive. But the forgotten book was different. It did not adapt to human understanding. It confronted. It exposed what man never wanted to face, that we are not the center of history. Some wilderness scrolls speak of a time when this book will be reopened. They say that before the end, the word that was sealed at the beginning will be released. And then the world will see that Genesis was only a bridge, not the starting point. This release will come not by human hands, but by direct revelation. That is why so many begin to feel that there is something missing, a holy nagging, a void that the verses cannot fill. The forgotten book is calling, and those who hear that call know the true beginning is yet to come. This book was dangerous for another reason too. It spoke of identity. It revealed that man was created in the image of something that already existed, not an idea, but a form, a prior essence that reflected the eternal plan itself. This means that man did not come into being as an experiment, but as a continuation. This changes everything, because it transforms Genesis from a beginning into a resumption. And in doing so, it destroys the whole idea that we were created to begin something. It shows that we were made to continue what had already been decreed before time. No wonder this book was sealed. It empowers, it enlightens, it liberates, and most of all, it reconnects man to what was said before, a time when there was no sin, no fall, no pain, only purpose. And now, fragment by fragment, this book is being reconstructed, not by archaeologists, but by awakened hearts, because what has been removed from the paper has never been erased from heaven. In some ancient circles, this book was known as Sefer HaReshit, the Book of the Beginning. In others, it was called the Book of the Pure Word, or the Book of the Eternal Testimony. But in almost all the occult records, there is one name that recurs, the Book of Origins, and it is not entirely unknown. In texts such as the Book of Jubilees, the Book of Enoch, and even in the marginal commentaries of the Talmud, fragments of it are scattered about. Some believe that this book survives within others. Others believe that it has been sealed in heaven and will be opened only once more, in the end times. But there is one name that runs through all these echoes, the Book of Creation, Sefer Yetzirah, a mysterious text attributed to Abraham, but which many believe to be only a fragmented copy of something much older. It speaks of creation through letters, of the decree before matter, of the spiritual structure of the universe. It is short, cryptic, little understood, but it bears traces of what the ancients called the previous revelation. And according to the Zohar, the full content of this book will only be revealed when the world returns to its original state, when creation is restored to what it was before time. There is also a powerful theory that says that the true forgotten book was oral. It was transmitted by God to the first heavenly beings and later to Adam, not on parchment, but in sound, light, and presence. A knowledge that man could not write, only experience, and that after the fall it was removed and stored in heaven. This book has no title. It has essence. It is what God said before everything. What was removed from the Bible was not just a text. It was a language, a dimension, a piece of eternity. So perhaps it will never return in the form of paper, but it will return in the form of consciousness, of revelation, of reactivated spiritual memory. And when it does, many will see that Genesis was just a door, and that on the other side of it there was always the book that started it all, the book that revealed the purpose before creation, the order before light, and the name before the first letter, the book that should have started the Bible, but was removed. And now it is beginning to return. It is no coincidence that the Apocalypse speaks of a book sealed with 7 seals, which could only be opened by a worthy lamb, because the end of history cannot be understood without the true beginning, and that beginning was erased from the earth, but never from the heavens. The book that was supposed to begin the Bible was not forgotten by God. It was simply kept. And now, as the truth begins to emerge, it manifests itself again, not with pages, but with understanding, not with ink, but with light. Many will still try to deny it. They will say that this is myth, heresy, or invention, but the very structure of the Bible screams that something is missing, that there was a previous decree, a previous revelation, a previous language, a book that the prophets mentioned without citing, that the apostles echoed without naming, because they knew that one day those with spiritual ears would ask again, what did God say before all this? And that is the question that haunts the elders, the guardians of tradition, and those who have built their truths on an incomplete narrative. Because if this book is restored, everything changes, the doctrine, the purpose, the identity, because it shows that creation did not begin with man. It began with the eternal plan, a plan that precedes time, a plan that was written, then sealed. And now, it begins to be read again. If this revelation spoke to you, don't keep it to yourself. Comment below what touched you the most, and share this truth with someone who needs to wake up. Your participation here is not by chance. God is gathering those who feel that something has always been missing, and now it is beginning to be restored. Subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and, if you can, become a member. By doing so, you help us keep this mission alive, to bring to light what has been hidden for centuries. Click on Become a Member and walk with us on this journey. The beginning is being rewritten.